Thank you, Tim. It is good to be back here. I think it was October last year when I was here last time, and it's nice coming to clubs again because you see so many familiar faces, and then especially with this club, probably a quarter of the members are members of AWG and GAW. I've practiced those acronyms on my way.
What did you turn for us?
Last time here was a covered calabash.
Yes.
So
Did you finish that and bring it?
I forgot it. I finished it, so I was talking to Tim about a month ago. I was like, hey, I'll mail you this piece. I think I've got it about done. And he's like, no, just next time I see you, bring it. It's like, cool. I'll put it on my mental list.
It was a beautiful little calabash.
Yeah, it's done, so I will mail it to you. This has been a doozy of a week, I'll say that. But anyway, it's great to be back here. So what I'm going to do today is something quite a bit different. It does involve turning a bowl, but in a different way. So I call this a flower pedestal spin top. And I've been on you turn what you like to turn, and you get into these grooves of turning something or some style. And I've been turning a lot of spin tops or variations on spin tops lately because it's just fun to fiddle around with and involve some precise turning. And so I've been kind of thinking, what can I do with that and how do I make it different? And I like to do a lot of like sculptural pieces. So for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to make a flower and make a different type of a flower involving a spin top because that's what I've been doing a lot of lately. So I made something like this. This will be similar to our demo piece where you have a pedestal, and I'll hold it up here. I'll pass this around as well. A pedestal that has a little bulb on top, and this serves as the spin platform for a little bowl with a bulbous area and a little hollow in the back of it. And the nice thing about this is you can snap it together, and it's pretty secure. You can take it off again and then spin it around, and it spins. And since it's a flower, what do flowers do? They look at the sun, but they don't just look ahead or straight up when it comes to a rest on a slant. So I think it's kind of fun. Involves a lot of different types of turning, so there's something for everyone. I think I heard somebody say that they're very new to turning, which is pretty cool. We'll talk about some basic bowl turning and then get into a couple of other things. And I just really love to turn, so it's fun to be here and talk about it. So I'll pass this around right here, and you can check it out. I've got a couple of other things I'll pass around as we go, but that's the basic design that we're working with today. And so the ones that I have, it's funny, somebody brought a canary wood piece. I originally was planning on, that's canary wood right there, planning on canary wood. But the board that I had, that I made a few examples out of, I had these weird cracks. And so I turned them partially just to investigate the cracks. And I have them here just in case this piece of walnut goes bad. But I figured probably a good idea not to turn something a little bit sketchy. So instead I have this piece of walnut, and it's black walnut that is pretty dry. And I have a piece of hard maple we use for the pedestal. And I want to start out turning this bowl. I will say, once I'm setting this up, this is about 6 1/4 inches by 6 1/4 inches by a little bit less than 2 inches thick, maybe about 1 1/4 inches thick. And when I demo, there's a couple of rules that I follow. I don't like to stand during demonstrations, especially if it's in a closed room, because nobody wants to breathe that. I also like to kind of explain everything as if most people are new, and I know and I'm a little bit nervous because I'm turning a bowl, and there are people that turn far better bowls than me in here. I know it. So keep your mouth shut if you see something I'm doing wrong. I'm just kidding about that. But there are going to be a lot of things that I talk about that are if you're experienced turning bowls, that it'll be like a duh kind of thing. But there's probably somebody in here that doesn't know a tip or a trick. And then we'll get into some spindle turning, and I'll have some things, a lot of spindle turners in here that might be kind of boring and elementary, but there might be somebody that doesn't know that. So at any point in time, if you have any questions or need me to clarify something, just let me know. I said I'm a teacher by trade. My real job is a teacher at a community college. So I'm used to my students yelling at me. You don't have to raise your hand, just shout outs, or fall asleep if you want to. I'm used to that as well. No, just kidding. I'll throw something at you. All right, so what I'm doing now, I've mounted this just between centers. With this bowl, I have a 4-prong spur drive, and that can leave kind of a nasty mark if you really want to keep this surface. But if you notice with that bowl going around, the bulb within the bowl is recessed, so it's a little bit lower than the lip, and then there's a hollow in the back, so I don't have to worry about preserving the wood on either end of this. So I can really drive the center point of my live center and my spur drive into this pretty deeply. And I like to use a spur drive. Anytime you're using, face grain or something, it's a little bit better than like a step drive. And this isn't perfectly flat, so between centers is the way to go to face everything. If you haven't done a whole lot of bowl turning from just dry stock like this, what I'm doing right now is I'm turning this really slowly and just looking at the corners to see how far they are going from my tool rest. And I can see that here I'm a little bit slanted, so what I'm going to do is just adjust it a tiny little bit. Right. And we'll call that good. This will be a little bit of a different demo than the last time I was here. With there being 3 clubs in the area and a lot of members being willing to make the drive to each of the clubs, it can get a little bit boring seeing something repeated. So I try to be aware of that and do something different for each of the 3 clubs whenever I'm demonstrating for them. So this will be different. If you were at the Atlanta Woodturners Guild, I think it was the WGW in January, I did a demo on a different type of spin top like this. So this will be sort of different than what you saw, even though it's still within the spin top realm. This is a type that has a bearing and it spins really, really well. But this is kind of nice in that it's all wood. There's no metal component, so it's just, we're wood turners. We like to turn wood, and this is all wood. I'll pass this around to you. So it's kind of fun to fidget around with. Same sort of concept, just turned around and has a couple of different components in it. I'm going to start out with a bowl gouge, and this is a 5/8 bowl gouge. We'll turn the exterior of the bowl with that, and it's just a basic open form shape. This is an old Packard bowl gouge. If you have any Packard tools, they made some really, really nice steel, and it's kind of nice. It's beefy and it's really hard. Let's see.
He's over there.
So I like to, so it's between 50 and 55 degrees. It's probably about 53 degrees right now. I don't measure so exactly. I get the grind where I like it and then just try to replicate it. And the only time I'm really measuring the angle is if I'm like regrinding a gouge. But it has a pretty dramatic swept back grind to it because I like a pull cut, and we'll see that it's pretty fast and efficient. This was just a demo example.
I'll send it around.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Pass it around still.
55.
Nice thing about this though, and I'll talk about that, is if you mess up, and if I mess up, or something like that happens, it's a spindle, the pedestal, so it's really easy to get back on center, and then you could easily add a second piece that accomplishes the same thing, so really no big deal.
Sorry about that.
That's all good. If I would have cared more, it would have had finish and everything on it. It's unsanded and everything, so it was just made to pass around for this.
It's gonna be an expensive demo, isn't it?
That's right, I just charged it to 10 actually. That was personal account.
I was just trying to quick.
All right, so let's get to turning this bowl, and I'll talk a little bit while I'm turning this. Let's see.
You turn the red knob to the right.
That's right.
And push the button. Very bad.
I like this lathe. I just haven't. Let me turn on. So I'm not going crazy fast. This is about 1200. That's about as fast as I'll go. So with this, anything with corners, like if you're turning greenwood or drywood and you have these corners that are making these interrupted cuts, it can be a little bit jarring if you just go straight in. So I want to talk a little bit about, especially if you're new to turning, about a pretty easy, like friendly on your elbows, friendly on your body way to accomplish this. So like you were seeing, I was making sure that the piece of wood wasn't going to hit the tool rest before I get going. And then if I just put the tool down, I'm going to leave it up about 45 degrees closed, and I'm going to anchor this on my hip and just press down with my left hand. I'm not, holding like would be focusing on a precise cut or nice push cut. I'm just holding the tool down and I'm moving my hip. right? And so all I'm doing is I'm making this arced head. And what that's doing for me puts very, very, very little pressure on my arm. It's my hip that's taking the force, but it's really the tool rest that's taking the banging like that. Bam, bam, bam. And what I'm also doing by making this really smooth arcing motion is I'm riding the bevel the whole time. So obviously it's still interrupted, like wood, air, but I'm keeping as much bevel contact as possible instead of going at it like this, like you might push straight, which that's not too bad, but I can feel it a little bit more, right? So just anchor and cut. And this is a really good way to take pretty large cuts too, through a full range of motion. You don't have to constantly reset with something like with the tool rest right here, and I was just taking off the corners. One thing that's always kind of nice to do, and it can make it a little bit faster, haven't done it yet, is just to make a little pencil mark where the wood's going to be fully round. Otherwise, you have to stop and reset and check to see what's going on. Right, there we go.
Twist it to the right.
So listen, I'm going to get this right, eventually. Third time's the charm, so next time I'll do it right. So I'll do this. I can see my pencil mark, and I'll just make it up. And you can hear that I'm touching wood completely there versus out here. Right. So now I know that this is what I need to do. And I can just pick up my bevel. Because I have a spur drive, I can crank down a little bit more as well versus like steps in or something. And you can stay pretty far over the ruler as long as you maintain some sort of bevel contact. And so I don't have to be really close to my tool rack. Especially with a 5/8 inch gouge, it's pretty hefty. So what I like to do with this, especially dry wood, where if you keep doing that and you get to where you have a really thin edge, if I kept going, because of the way the grain's oriented, I'll probably end up with a lot of chip out on this wood. So I like to leave about a quarter of a half inch or something like that, so I can approach it from the other side, and it's thick enough to where when I start cutting away the corner, I'm not going to end up with chunks flying around. So just reorient ourselves really quickly, make sure the wood blank isn't hitting anything, and then I'll do the same thing, just approaching it from the other side. That's why we wear a face mask, because it's still, come on. I had a little bit of softwood that was kind of faulted, so it wasn't super strong. There's also something to be said, I made a joke about the face mask, and it's true, you should be aware of the dangers of turning, but also it's more important, just wearing a face shield only gets you so far. You want to make sure you stand out of the line of fire when you're like truing up a square blank, or anytime you're turning. If you can stand out of the line of fire, that's going to be the safest approach anyway, right? So now I'm just flattening this edge. And I'll just do it up like that. All right, last thing I'm going to do is kind of a nice pull cut that's a little bit different. Again, this is speaking to people that might not be so experienced. A lot of times what you get when you talk about bowl turning in like a face grain orientation is you want to keep your flute pretty closed and 45-degree angle so that you have a little chance of a catch. But when you are trying to really true up the surface and get it as smooth as possible, you can do this really nice shear pull cut. So what I'm doing, it's a little bit funky because this is one of those cuts where it's like the best cut you're going to get is the closest one to a catch. But if you do it in a real controlled way, it's pretty safe, right? So I'm going to talk about that briefly, and then we'll actually finish turning the outside of this bowl. So here, as this is spinning up, I'm going to anchor the tool on my hip, and I'm going to show you that. And right now I'm touching the non-cutting surface of the tool. Now I'm riding the bevel, right? But it's close enough to where you can see that the cutting edge is right there. But if I just, like right on the bevel, now I'm cutting. So I have this wing cut that if it was held like this, I get this massive catch. It would just roll over on me. But since I'm holding the tool down like you would shear scrape, right, I can ride the bevel and I can really true up the surface of my wood. And it's a nice one you can push and pull as you go. And I like this because depending on what you're doing, this might be a shortcut to not having to sand as much. And it's basically the same principle as like riding the bevel on a skew or where you spin a roughing gouge. You're just really close to the edge, but you're doing it in a controlled way. So I have this that's pretty nice. What I want to do now is I want to true up this base. This is going to be the side that I have a tenon, and then when we actually start looking at the shape of the flower, we'll put a little bead or something on this edge using the extra wood from the tenon. So let's go ahead and face this or true it up, and then we will. I'll show you a cool little tool that I got from someone. Right. So you can do this a couple of different ways. Here, probably the safest way, and really the easiest way, just being conscious of the grain orientation with this face grain, just making these nice push cuts really gets you these clean fast cuts. See, a lot of people just start by doing either this long or this long push cut in this direction, where you're really just cutting against the grain. But if you focus your efforts on pushing toward the tailstock, you get these nice clean cuts. So this tool, I was doing a demo in Springfield, Missouri, and there was a guy that was really into 3D printing, which is great. You keep seeing more and more 3D printer integration into wood turning, like tools and hangers and things like that. And he developed this tenon sizer, and I don't use it too often, but it's kind of cool to shop around. Not shop around. His name was Jim, but I can't remember his last name. So I'm not trying to sell. I don't remember his last name, but it's a cool device that you just stick on your live center, and it's set up for like 4 different common tenon sizes. So here, if I wanted to size my tenon, you can do it by eye, which isn't too bad, or you can use something like vernier calipers, which I use quite a bit. Sometimes I don't trust myself, so I just rely on the calipers, and most of the time that's all right. But this is kind of fun. It has a groove for a pencil, and this closest mark is going to give you a 55 millimeter tenon. The only thing I don't like about this, and it's really not that big of a deal, it requires a short pencil. Right, so here, I'll put my pencil in this closest groove, have this stable in my tool rest, and I can just make a line like this. And I know that wherever that pencil line is, it's going to be exactly 55 millimeters. Also, the second coolest thing about this is, he 3D printed this, but it's also printed in a way it has an integrated holder. So you can just screw this to your wall and have it sitting right here. And if I need it really quickly, I just pull it off my wall, stick it on my live center, and there it goes. So it's really cool. I'll pass this around. It's pretty fun. Because I don't use it all the time. Because I usually just have calipers on hand or just eye it. But if I need something really precise, that's a really nice tool. And I just think it's really cool. That's great. Somebody came up with that idea on their own. And
Yeah, there'll be a lot more of those soon.
yeah, absolutely.
That's a good idea.
All right, so now we've got the size for a tenon. We're going to make our tenon. I'm going to make a little shoulder as well. And I'll talk about why I'm making a shoulder, and then we'll complete the external or the exterior curve of our bolt. All right, I'm going to move the tool rest so that it's coming in at this position, which allows me just to get a little bit. So we'll just stick with our 5/8 inch bolt gouge. I'm going to move the tool rest down a little bit. So I make this joke all the time. So do as I say, not as I do. You should always turn off the wave when you move your tool rest. If you don't, just be really aware where it is. So now I'm on this line. I'm just making the push cut, right, to get approximately the size of my tenon. It's not going to be that deep of a tenon. Let's say a 1/4 inch or so, maybe a little bit more. Probably 1/4 inch. So now what I'm doing is I'm just getting rid of some wood till I have a little shoulder And what the shoulder is going to do for me is it gives my chuck jaws a flat surface to press against. So if I was making this curved bowl and I didn't have a shoulder, I might size my tenon perfectly right, but as that curve comes out, I don't really have a whole lot of surface area on my wood that comes into contact with the top of my chuck jaws. And just like your spindle, this flat face is what keeps everything running true. Like when you put your chuck on, having a flat face on your wood keeps everything pretty tight and stable. And so I got this shoulder that's, maybe like 2 1/8 inch or so, 2 1/4 inch. And I'm going to come in and just try to get that as 90 degrees as possible. A lot of times I'll take a spindle gouge and just really true up the inside of this mating surface. Right? And then what I also do is with the chuck that I brought, it's got like bird beaks jaws. So I typically will put like a little indentation just so I have something for the jaws to grab onto a little bit extra. Since it's not a dovetail, right? It kind of slots the jaw in. So that looks pretty good to me. We'll just get rid of it a little bit. So we're going to take this tenon a little bit later on, and I'm going to use it for a little bit of extra meat to add a feature around the entrance to the hollow form. I'll pass this around a little bit as I'm going to talk about the design there. Go back to my trusty bowl gouge, and we'll just make some cuts to make this resemble a ball instead of just a spinning cylinder. And same for routines. I'm just going to do, I'll try to aim it towards him if I can. I'll try to do the majority of the roughing with just these twist cuts. And I'm sort of envisioning the shape of my bowl while I'm doing this. So I'm just making these little steps. And my shoulder, ends up giving me a flat surface, but it also gives me a whole lot of meat. So that way, if I were to continue the curve of the bowl to my tenon, like I can continue it through the meat of my shoulder, right? I'm not limited by my tenon size when I want to complete the curve, if that makes sense. Otherwise, sometimes you have this really nice tenon, and if you don't curve quite a bit, you'll end up with this flat spot. So it's like almost like an OG where you have this flat, and then the curve comes out. Here I can make this really nice continuous curve that I think is just kind of pleasing. So now we have the rough shape of this bowl, and I'm just going to just clean it up a little bit with just some pull cuts, just little shear pull cuts. And what I'm doing is I'm just looking for any flat spots or anything that might, just detract or distract from the curve. When I'm at my shop at home, I get so anal about this. I'll make some cuts and I'll turn off the lathe. I'll just stand back and look at it. And behind my lathe is this ugly concrete wall, so I'm really trying to focus on this. And it's just nice to appreciate a curve. Sometimes when I'm talking about it, it sounds so corny. I don't have any. I have friends at home, but the friends that I hang out with and see most often aren't woodturners, so they don't like talking about curves and things spinning around. And whenever I start talking about that, I'm just like, all right, this guy again. So now I get to satisfy myself by talking about curves and continuous curves and things like that. Or you guys are forced to listen to me, right? It makes me feel good. But anyway, so we've got this, and what we're going to do is just going to make one more little cut coming in right here. Just a little push cut. And that should be good enough. So what I have is this exterior shape that I'm okay with. I want it to be pretty open because if you remember the piece that was being passed around, that little bulb in the middle, we want to make that as domed as possible. And if you have a really closed bowl, this is still pretty open, but it's quite a bit steeper. Getting the edge of this bulb, I'll pass this around like I said in a little bit, sharp and at like a good junction to the curve of the bowl is a little bit tricky as far as space goes. But the more open and shallow the bowl is, the more friendly it is coming into this little domed shape. If that sounds a little bit weird, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, then that'll make sense. I think this will be a good shape to make a pretty easy pleasing shape. So now that's good enough. It's not bad. We're going to put this in our chuck, and we're going to turn the interior of this, and I'll talk about what I'm doing as we go there. And I'll use my 5/8 inch gouge a little bit more, and then we'll put it away. I keep one set screw in for the occasional, if you're turning in reverse. And I've got my chuck key right here. I lose my face shield looking on my head. All right. So we're going to tighten this up. And now let's make the interior of our bowl. So we're just going to turn this and just basic bowl turning. Once we get to the dome portion, I'll talk about a couple of things that can make that a little bit easier. So first thing we want to do is just screw this up, this base. So it's a little bit slow. It's about 1,000 RPMs right now. Probably won't go too faster than that. So I'm just making some push cuts to this. I'm going a little bit deep right here because that's where our bowl is going to be. You want to make sure that it's below the surface. We're going to measure that as well, so that way we don't go through the top when we're turning this around. So now let me just switch to just a 1/2 inch bowl gouge. It has the same grind and everything. It's a crown tool if that matters to you. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make one little cut here at the edge. And so let's turn up the speed a little bit. So with this design, with spin tops, I'm not a physicist. The last time I did a demo, there was a physicist in the crowd and I said something wrong. And he corrected me, which was great. He came up to me afterwards and we talked about the mechanics of spin tops. But with this design, I've found that it's nice to have a pretty heavy central core, especially when the top is above the fulcrum, that spinning point. And as little weight as possible. So we're going to turn a fairly thin walled bowl, but leave a really big fat piece in the middle. So that way when this is sitting on the pedestal, it's fairly stable. And it doesn't whirl a whole lot. It will still. So now, let me take this off. Now we're just going to turn this. We'll turn up the speed just a little bit more. I'm not some people just like Jimmy Clue style, crank it up fast, and if it flies off, well, put it back on and do the same thing. I tend to not go crazy with the speed, but for something small like this, especially during the demo, it makes it a little bit faster when you're doing something not terribly special at this moment. Which bowls are the best thing. I love turning bowls. It's nothing more fun, but it's very unique. Right? So all we're doing is just hollowing this out. And when I get to my edge, we'll talk about what I do to turn something pretty thin with fairly consistent walls and pretty smooth interior. So we'll turn this so it's about, maybe that's just a little bit less than maybe it's about 1/15 of an inch or so. And we're going to try to maintain that thickness until we get to, maybe just a little bit thicker at the bottom until we get to this bowl. So a good thing to do is if you have trouble, if you enter into a bowl and you have problems with it like skipping out on you, there's two things you can do. You can completely close your flute. So if it's completely closed, right, you have less of a chance of just catching. So when it's catching right there, it's rotating around on that curved edge. So if you're closing it, right, you're leaving as little of a chance of that as possible happening. But also, if it still doesn't work for you, go to a smaller gouge and get that entry cut with the smallest bowl gouge that you have. Because that's going to take away the least amount of material. And then once you have just maybe about 1/8 of an inch of depth, you can switch to your bigger gouge and just follow that. Just ride the bevel and follow it. Right. And see it. So now I did that, and fortunately I didn't escape. I also tend to leave the very, very edge just a tiny, tiny bit thicker, like a hair thicker, just so you have a little bit more material at the top. And then you can go to your final thickness. So when I'm doing this, we're just doing it piece by piece. Right, so I'm going to hollow it down to about, or cut down to about that point, and then I'm going to take away some more material from the center, going to ride my bevel and pick up the cuts, and then keep going. And as I'm watching, or as I'm cutting, I'm just following my bevel, right, and watching this side. So a lot of times you think about watching the other side, or watching the ghost if you're turning something that's interrupted. But here, if I'm just imagining where my gouge is, following the same contour as the outside of my bowl, I can get pretty close. We have this really cool ability as humans to just see past something when you're using some muscle memory to do something. So let's just get rid of a little bit more material. And I'm just going down maybe about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch at a time. Right. Just getting rid of material. And so now, I'm going to pick up that cut. I have a tiny, tiny little lip left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in fairly horizontally. As soon as I feel that I'm picking up the cut, I'll open my flute a little bit, so that way I don't put a lot of pressure on the wall. Right? So let's go in. Now I'm picking it up, open my flute. And I'm just using my 2 fingers to keep my tool on the edge. We can do the same thing. I think Ashley Harwood, you guys know that turner from Maine. I think she's from Maine. She's on Instagram, and she has all these videos where, and I think it's for marketing, where she'll just start out and then, I'm pretty sure it's just to like look cool. Then she'll just take her hand off and talk to her student at the same time as she's making the cuts. And it could be terrifying to think about, but that's all this hand is doing, is just keeping it down at the tool rest. If you're riding your bevel, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to get a catch if I do that. It's like pride is going to lead me to a catch. But all I'm doing is just putting very, very little pressure with this hand. I'm anchoring the tool on my hip, and I'm just making this sweeping curve with my hips again. Right? So now I have this wall that's pretty consistently thick. I brought some curve calipers that we can use to double check it, but we'll just keep doing the same thing. And using that push cut, I'm not removing all the material like this, because if I do that, I'm just cutting against the grain. I'm pushing to rough out the material. Right? And then I'm going to switch to, and here there's a little bit of chatter, so I need to slow down on my cut, or maybe open up the flute some. So here, I've got this lip. Cut off the material. This is where I might want to think about keeping a little bit thicker toward the bottom. Right, I'll follow this and keep it fairly consistently thick. But when I get to about right here, that's when I'll start to get a little bit thicker for 2 reasons. One, so I don't screw up and make a funnel in front of you guys. But also, it gets me to where I'm just increasing the weight of the flower, the spin top, toward the middle. Out here on the edges, keep it light and thin. You want? Oh. Right here, pick this up. That's not bad. There's a tiny, tiny little lip, so let's just make one more cut. That's the word phrase, right? There we go. That's pretty good. I feel it, but I'm not going to take my chances. A tiny little bit, you could stand out easily. So now we've got most of our bowl removed, and I want to think about how big this bulb is going to be. The rule of thirds, right? It's something that it's a rule, but it's not really a rule. It's a nice standard for getting something that looks proportionally attractive. So what I typically do is I'll start out with trying to measure this inner bowl is about a third of the diameter of the total bowl. And then usually end up making it a little bit wider than a third, like as it goes down. So the bulk of it is going to be within that third, and then as you you reach toward the end of the dome, it gets a little bit thicker. Right now we have, and I like to use millimeters. Don't hate me for it. I did a demo and somebody got mad about it. He's like, "Why do you use millimeters? We're in America." And fair enough. But it's a heck of a lot easier to measure this as 138 millimeters, and then 7/64. It just makes sense. So I've got 138 millimeters or so. And let's divide it by 3. Any math people in here? What's 130 divided by 3? Or something thereabouts. About 40, 45. Yeah, perfect. Nerves, help me mess up math. So I need to rely on you guys sometimes. So let's say 40, 45. That's a good number. So I want to measure this central bulb at 45 millimeters diameter. So right now, I'm just checking this. This lip that I left is about 46. So we'll call it pretty good. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to do a push cut just straight down from here that gets me pretty close to the bottom of where I turned away from my bowl. There's a little lip. Let's cut that away because we have some mass to deal with, and then we'll make our push cut. This could be a disaster point right here. I think we'll be all right. I always bring a couple extra in-progress pieces just in case. But hopefully I don't have to use it. So again, this is something where I can feel it. You can see it too. Yeah, it's right there. It's pretty obvious. So we definitely want to get rid of that and maybe have a little bit of entertainment if we're unlucky.
One more cut.
That's right. One more cut. Somebody has a T-shirt of that going around, and it's like a broken bowl on the ground. So right here, another thing you can do, and if you have, like if you're turning a piece of green wood that's wet and you're making it really thin, and it's starting to wobble some, or even dry wood that's you've released the tension as you're cutting, you can just stabilize that a little bit with the back of your finger, and do the same sort of thing. So you can see now, I got this chatter from the wood, just like some tension being released. But if I stabilize it, it's not as bad. You can still hear it. And as I'm approaching, I'm going to close my flute so I don't catch the edge of my bowl. All right, that's better. It's still a little bit, but I'm fine with that. So now let's make this push cut. And you want to be careful here because if you see, my gouge is starting to get kind of close to the edge right here. All right, so I am kind of looking back and forth between the cutting edge where it is on the wood and the length of my gouge to make sure I don't hit this. And it's not going to do much, but if I push it really hard into it, I'm going to have a natural edge bowl and I'll be able to enter the challenge. So I just make a push cut, another push cut, and as I'm going down, right, if I kept that same angle, I would hit the bowl. So I can open up my flute a little bit, right, it gives me a little bit more freedom. All right, so now we have something that kind of looks like a top hat sitting in a bowl. So we're just going to pick up this cut a little bit more. And we'll make one more. And go as close as you're comfortable with So now we need to make a dome instead of a top hat. So all we're going to do is we're just going to make, kind of like reversing this, we're just going to make a push cut. And I'll use my shoulder and my wrist to stabilize this, and we'll just try to make a nice continuous curve. We'll cut off the corners first. I'm going to lower my tool rest just a little bit. And I'll tell you something you can do that might make it easier, because sometimes when you're hanging out over here, it can be a little bit unstable if you're doing a bigger piece than this, especially. But you cut off the corners. One time I was making one of these, and I was trying to be real aggressive. And you might know where this is going. While I was making a nice continuous curve, pushing hard, and I reached the lip, I went past, and I jammed my bowl gouge into my bowl and just destroyed it. So as you're growing, as you're making this cut, just be aware of how much material you have left. Because if you get a little bit aggressive, then it's really easy to ruin all of your progress. And then you have to rely on your canary wood extra pieces that might have cracks in it. Okay. Right. So now we have this pretty nice bowl right here, and it's not bad. And I'm pretty happy with that. I don't really need to do anything else with it, but I'm going to do one more thing. I think it's kind of cool. If you find that, like I said, being out here is a little bit unnerving, or it just doesn't feel stable that you're away from your hip, what you can do is you can just turn in reverse, and then it's a little bit easier to take this push cut and use your hip to guide you most of the way. And when I'm doing that, I'll usually go to about 3/4 of the dome, right there, to where the tool goes away from my hip, and then put it back into a normal rotation, and then just do a really gentle push cut right there. So I'm trying to maintain as much hip contact as possible. If you're not comfortable being out here, or if you have shoulder issues, like this is not a good position to be in if you have problems with your shoulder. So what I'm going to do, the last thing here, and then we'll turn this around, and then we're almost done with this. It'll go pretty quickly once we turn it around, is I'm going to make a little indentation right here. So if you look at a flower like a daisy, like that one that was passed around, I have a little dip. If you look at a daisy in the wild, there's a little dip in the middle. You have all these, like, I'm not going to talk too much about flower biology, but all the little yellow things in the middle of a daisy, or the brown things in a brown-eyed Susan, those are the individual flowers. Like the yellow petals and the white petals are leaves, right? They're just leaves. And the tiny, tiny little things in the center are the flowers, and they just curl in on one another. So next time you're, like, thinking about flowers, just look at one. Usually there's a little dip. So we're going to make just a tiny little dip, and then we'll turn this around. This is something that it's just a design thing. Like anything else, it's a design preference. I just think, especially if you're going to be like doing any carving or pyrography, like burning on it, it makes a pretty nice little feature, a little bit nicer than just the flat dome. So that's that. Now let's turn this around, and we're going to make our little hollow. And there's just a couple things we need to do first. Really just one thing I need to do first is I want to measure how deep the top of my bulb is, including that little divot. So you can do this a couple of different ways. I like these vernier calipers. They have this little depth. I know there's a technical term for this prong. I call it the depth prong. But if I put that in the center of my bowl and I look from lip to lip, I can just lower my calipers until I'm on the same plane. Or I have lip, caliper, lip, and that tells me exactly how deep this is. So it is 10 millimeters, right? From the top of my bowl to as far as I want to go, if I'm poking through the edge when I'm on the other side, is 10 millimeters. So I want to make sure when I'm making the hollow on the back side, I don't go past that 10 millimeter mark, or else I have a tube, which could be fine too, depending on what you want to do. So let's take this off and turn this around. And I'm going to use a different, oops, gosh, where's the,
Hold on. It's the button on the front. The button.
oh, no, it's right in front of me. It's so flush, it's nice that, the simple things in life. So you can hold this bowl, because we need to hold it securely and get into here without tailstock support. You can do this in a number of different ways. Vacuum chuck, whatever. You can make a jam chuck and then tape it or use hot glue to keep everything secure. I don't have a vacuum setup, and it's one of those things I've been procrastinating and keep saying I'll get one soon enough. But I have these coal jaws, or jumbo jaws is the one-way version. I'm not a big fan though. I don't know if you guys use these. They are not, they do their job, and I've used them many, many times, but they're just not really that great. I think Axminster makes ones that are machined and they're really precise, but they're like $400 or something crazy. Maybe more expensive now. But these are good enough. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to put our bowl in here. And I was just hoping that I wouldn't have to remove my, there we go. Good. You want to be careful when you're putting this on because our bowl is fairly thin. And if I really crank down with these buttons putting pressure on it, I'm going to crack my bowl. So I'm going to put just enough pressure to hold my bowl in place. And then I'll bring up my tailstock. Remember, I started out with my hole in this orientation when it was between centers. So I should, if I put my life center in, should be able to use this point that was from my life center to register my place or my piece in the center. Because with these jaws, they're not perfect. So if you tighten down without having some sort of registration mark right there, you could hold it off center and it's not that big of a deal. But that just gives you a little bit more insurance that everything's going to be nice and dandy. Right? So now this is in place. I'm not cranking down too hard, just enough to hold this. And I always give it a little wiggle to make sure it's fine. Give it a little spin, and it's pretty good. So let's keep tailstock support for just a minute or so while we just remove a little bit of material. Then I'll take this away, we'll make her hollow, and then we'll make the pedestal. That'll go pretty quickly. Put these big jaws on. You want to make sure your speed is a little bit lower than it was, just for safety purposes. I'll use a little. No, let's just use our same bull gouge for this. That 1/2-inch bull gouge, and turn it on. And you can see these are wobbling. And that's fine. You know, the reason I don't like these is it's not necessarily these bumpers, but it's the plates themselves are just a little bit off. So if you really want a flat surface, you're not really going to get it with these. But that said, I've used these quite a bit, and they've never really failed me. So it's kind of just like, you know, Santa needs to bring me something that I really love. Yeah. So I'm doing the same thing, just making the hook cut. And then this material, and then I'm going to pick up my cuts. Right here. And I want to make sure that I'm following the same line. There's a little bit of chatter you can hear where it's not perfectly flat. That's something that easily stands out, so it's not a big deal. As long as you get pretty close, like that's not bad. And you can draw it across with a little shear cut to refine that a bit. And I think we don't need to do that. So now I'm just going to remove a little bit of extra material here. And you can see now what I was talking about, having that shoulder there gives us a lot of meat to work with so that I could continue that curve. If I had just had a 10 in, I wouldn't have been able to make that cut like I just did. We'd be limited with the depth of our 10 in. But I think we end up with something that's a little bit more pleasing. There we go. So So now what we're gonna do is let's just make one little cut. While we have tailpipe support, I'm going against the grain. I'm making these lateral, this lateral cut, putting these forces laterally. So I want to make sure I'm doing that while I have as much support as possible, just for my own sake. So now that's good enough. We can take off our tailstock, finish removing this nub right here. We'll remove our tailstock. We don't need to take it off. Just take off our tailstock support, remove this nub. We will just curve this over a little bit, and then I'll drill a hole, we'll hollow out a little bit, then we'll make our pedestal. Here, just gotta be real careful of removing, especially with these jaws. See, there we go, that's what happens. But it's still secure. So this is the downside. And I'll tell you what I did. I brought some tape to combat this. It's not that big of a deal. But the downside to not being able to crank down quite a bit is that you don't have a whole lot of extra support. Right. So let's just use our friend blue tape, and we'll make we'll put a couple strips on here, and this is just going to press the bowl into the surface of these plates, and it should be pretty secure. I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like they've been making painter's tape thinner and thinner. Every time I buy it, it feels like it's thinner. And maybe I'm just imagining that, but I'm not. Yeah, it's just, it rips so easily. So when you're doing this, just be careful. If I rip this off, it kind of defeats the purpose of having tape here. So what I like to do is I just kind of wrap a piece of tape around the jaw. So I have a lot of adhesive contact while still holding my bowl down. We'll put one more piece of tape, and that should be good. Well, let's just take a chance and do one more little turn. Should be all right. The power of tape. Let's see if that works. We'll just do some lighter cuts as well. All right. So if you find yourself, you can see it jumping around just a little bit there as well. You can just drop your tool a little bit, close the flute, right, and we'll around the edge a little bit as well. I won't play with it too much. So now what I want to do is I want to drill a hole with just a drill bit real quick. Usually when I'm doing this, I like to use my skew just to give me a little divot so my Forstner bit that we're going to use has something to follow. So here I've got a Jacob's chuck with a 1/2-inch Forstner bit, and we're going to drill a pilot hole, and then once we have our hole drilled, we're just going to widen our cavity a little bit. So this is a 1/2-inch Forstner bit, and does anybody remember the depth from the lip to the top of the bulb?
10 mil.
10 mil. You guys were paying attention. You need to write my students some notes for that one. So 10 millimeters. So I can do a real quick rough measurement with my calipers. Let's see, I have 10 millimeters right here. And so 10 millimeters is about where it's just below the top of these buttons right here. So let's say if I'm going from the lip, I want to go to, we'll give ourselves about 5 millimeters of clearance. So right here, I want to measure from this point to this point, and that tells me how deep I can drill. So it's a little bit awkward, but what you can do is the same sort of thing. Just get your eye so that you're looking flat across the face right here. And then wherever this lines up. So 25 millimeters. We're going to drill 25 millimeters deep. And that includes the little tip of our Forstner bit. So you can measure this. You can put a little stop collar on this. You can put a piece of, you can put a pencil mark, but I always revert to a piece of tape. So 25 millimeters from our prong is almost to that flange where it splays out a little bit. So this is the point where we're going to drill to, and we'll drill pretty slowly so we don't catch and get a little funky with our bolt. When I'm drilling on the lathe, typically go pretty slow speeds. All right, so I'm going to drill to this piece of tape, and we'll do it slowly. So right now I'm at 760. Let's take the speed down just a little bit to about go about 550, 600 or so. If it was a bigger bit, I go a little bit slower. Smaller bits, probably stay the same speed. So I've got my tailstock locked down, and I'm just advancing my quill, especially when I start, go a little bit slow, and you can increase the speed. Now, Forstner bits are nice and you get a really clean cut, but they fill up with shavings pretty easily. So make sure you just progress slowly and back up. The worst thing, what's the worst thing you can do to a drill bit?
Get it burning. Force
Yeah, get it burning, create a lot of heat, because that's going to dull it. You force it, right? When you see smoke coming out, that means that your drill bit is getting duller. You're going to have to press harder. You're going to get a rougher cut. So the cleaner you can keep your hole, the better. Right? And it's one of those things, fast is slow, slow is fast, as you go. Right? We'll get a little bit of sound here. I'm going to clear it one more. Let's reach right till the end.
If you're putting a purple wax on that fourth bit before you start,
Yeah.
it makes it cut a lot smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're using bigger ones too, that makes a huge difference. Keeps it cooler. Gary said you put paraffin wax on your bit before you start. It keeps it a lot cooler, makes it run smoother and cut better. Definitely true. So now we've got our hole. We're done with our Jacob's chuck, and let's hollow this out just a little bit. Now with this, we're not creating like a true hollow form at all. All we're doing is we just want to make sure that the entrance to our cavity is the narrowest part, right? So behind the entrance, we want it to bulb out just a little bit. So when you have a push fit, all you have to do is get past the entrance, and then you have a little bit of wiggle room for the top of the pedestal, right? If it was just a cylinder, like I drilled with the hole, I put my pedestal in and it just gets stuck, like it can't spin around. If I have a little bit of room behind the entrance, now it can spin around and it's not restricted, if that makes sense. And so all I want to do is just widen this a little bit. You can use whatever tool you want to use. Just keep it simple though. And I'm just going to use a little bowl gouge. But just like whatever tool you want to use. So I have a 3/8 inch bowl gouge. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push this in, reach the end of my hole, and then just to make a couple of arcing cuts, right? I'll keep my flute pretty close, because if I just go in with my flute up, I'm going to get a nasty catch, unless I'm really cranking down and don't want to do that. So if I keep my flute closed and angle it, right, I'm just making like a nice scraping cut. And I'll go gentle so it doesn't dislodge the bowl. Again, we don't need to do a whole lot here. I'm just going to bevel the entrance a little bit. He's jumping around some. That's all right. Let's see how this goes. So right here, to prevent that, so like if I just go at the side, it's probably going to cause the bowl to jump. So I'm going to hit the back of my hole, put a lot of pressure on the back to keep it against the plate, and then I'm going to go to the side. Now in theory, that should keep us pretty safe, even though I'm doing like a nice scraping cut. Right, so I'm pushing pretty hard. I'm not cutting right now, I'm just pushing. If this was a spindle gouge, I'd be cutting, but I'm pushing and just drawing to the side. Right, this is small gouge, so it gets filled pretty easily. We don't have a whole lot of room to deal with, right? We've got a 3/8 inch gouge and a 1/2 inch entrance. So that's a 1/16 of an inch on each side. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room, so just a little bit at a time. And we don't need a clean cut on the inside. The only thing that we're really concerned with inside here is that the back of our hole is fairly flat. So we've widened this. It's probably not the most exciting thing to look at because you can't really see too much. But I have a wider hole right there than my entrance. And last thing is I want to make sure that the back, which is going to be the top of where the flower spins, is fairly flat. So I'll just use a spindle gouge, shove that in here so I could cut right at the end, and then I'll just make just a little curve so it flattens it, and then gets a little bit of a I keep saying flat. It makes a little concave surface at the back. Okay, so let's turn this back on. So just move it slowly. I can feel that I'm on the end. And I'm just drawing to the side. Do that once more. And just check. Let's make one more cut with the bowl gouge, and then I think we'll be done with that. I just want to make one more cut so that I have a shorter entrance. I have a pretty cylindrical entrance until I get to that hollow one. Widen it out a little bit so I have less wood to push through. I'll talk about that with the pedestal. So we'll make one more cut, but this one should be a safe one. One more cut. All right, there we go. See, that's the thing though, to get you, try to reach for the light or something that falls over the other side of your lathe, never do it, just let it fall. Even though, like, I'm not in danger right there, but just a good rule of thumb, try not to reach over the bed of the lathe when it's on. So I have this, and I'm pretty happy with that. We could take some time to really shape this right here, but I think for the sake of the demo, let's just move on and make the pedestal. Right? Because that might give me a little bit of time to talk about some embellishments that I do. Right? So I'm done with my bowl. Right? We're done with it. We can take the bowl off, and we're going to move to our pedestal. So we've got our tape right here. What is pretty? Yeah. Thanks. So I'm going to get a measurement real quick. Because this, using our calipers, you can see that the entrance to this hollow is 12 millimeters, right? So if we make a pedestal with a bulb that's smaller than 12 millimeters, fits in really easily. But if we turn it upside down, the bulb falls and breaks. Right? The pedestal doesn't break, though, just the bulb. Right? Just kidding. I like to ride that one too. So I want to make sure that my bulb of the pedestal is no smaller than 12 millimeters. I'm going to set my calipers to right now, let's say 14 millimeters, and that'll give me my rough size. And then we'll just take a little bit of material off the end, and then we'll test it a couple times, and when it fits with a little bit of force and pops in, that's how we know we have a pretty good size. So I'll pass this around at the end. Let me pass this around too, because I've talked about passing this around. With these really deep bowls, it's a different look to it. It still works, right? But it's a little bit more wobbly, and it's a little bit more challenging to turn, right? So typically I like a flatter bowl, but also, when this is sitting right here, a lot of times I'll spend time painting or burning or carving the interior of the flower, And if I have a really deep bowl, you can't really see that. So the wider your bowl is, and it's sitting at the same angle, you're exposing more of that interior surface. So if you're spending all this time making the inside look cool, or cool in an embellished way, I think it's better to have a flat, more open bowl than something like this, even though that can be cool in its own right. So I'll pass this around. This is an ash pedestal. You guys have seen that, but pass this around just to show you a different flavor. Also, you can make a different style bowl as well. This is this goes on the other pedestal. It fits, or fits. I'm just kidding. But it's more of like an OG shape. And I'm in the process of carving this quite a bit. So I left the walls pretty thick, but it's the same sort of thing. It opens, but right now, since it's pretty thick on the edge, you get a lot of wobble. But it's something that you can just make a different design. This is going to be kind of like a Daisy inspired one, but you can see what I might do to that inner bowl, pyro it with just tiny little ball points of different sizes in a specific way to make it look like a flower center. All right, I'll stop talking and let's make our pedestal. So we want to make sure that we rough it out at 14 millimeters. Let's take this off. And just like anything else, you could use whatever tool you want to use for this. I'm going to spend most of my time with the spindle roughing gouge. I just really like that tool. And to be honest, I'm not that great with a skew. A skew might be really good for long curves, especially in spindle orientation. I'm okay, but I'm trying to make it through the demo without getting a catch. So we're going to spend time with a spindle roughing gouge. Also, that's sort of a half joke, but also I typically like to demo with the most basic set of tools as possible. So I've been using mostly bowl gouges and a spindle gouge. I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge and another spindle gouge for this, especially for people that might be starting out. Like, wood turning is expensive, no doubt about it. Wood turning is pretty expensive, and I don't want you to be limited doing a project like this because you don't have a specific tool. You can do pretty much everything with combination of bowl gouges and spindle gouges, or everything that I like to do. Even a little bit of proper hollowing to do with both of those. So I've got this piece of hard maple, and just putting it between centers. It's already roughed out and round, so I'm just going to put a tenon on this side, chuck it up. And the reason I'm putting in a chuck is I want full contact with the top bulb. You can keep it between centers, but then you just have a little hole. And for this project, it's meant to be removable, so you want to make sure that when somebody takes the pedestal off, they see a nice rounded edge and not just a hole where your center point is. In the end, it doesn't really matter. It's just the way I like to do it. So you can use whatever. I'm just going to use a little skew. I said I'm about the skews, but skews are great if you're just using them as a parting tool or making a tenon. So we'll do that. And then we will check it up and make our proper pedestal. So here I'm going to use my calipers, set them at 55 millimeters. And I like to do this because this is something where I remember when I just started turning and I saw a video of somebody using calipers the size of tenon, and it was terrifying to me because like, oh man, you're sticking this point into this spinning piece of wood and you have this other pointed thing aiming right toward you. It looks terrifying, but if you do it safely, it's a great way to ensure that you're not eyeballing anything. Right? So I'm going to use my face mask though, face shield. So here, it's on the other side of the camera, but it's nothing special. When I'm, I'll just I'll true this face really quickly. When I'm truing a face with a skew, typically use the long point to, or a parting tool as well, to just cut into the front. That way I have a clean edge. If I just went in straight like this, I'd have this frayed edge. Right? Also something that if you're using a parting tool, I see a lot of people, or a lot of videos of people using their parting tools like this, just like a scraper going straight in. If you follow the surface of the bowl, like you just said, you can get really, really clean, surface of the bowl, surface of the spinning object. You can get really clean cuts, and you can have a surface that
is pretty ready for higher grit sandpaper versus having a lot of tear out if you just put it flat in. I'm gonna say it's the life of your SKU as well. So I've got this flat face or parting tool. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use these points of my caliper and I'm gonna stick the point that's closest to me, right, into the spinning face. But I'm not gonna stick the other side in. Imagine if I put this side that's away from me on this side, it's gonna flip those calipers out toward me. Well, I'm wearing my face shield, so hopefully it doesn't bounce under. But if I just come into contact with the point that's closest to me, since this is spinning down, like nothing's gonna happen. It just pushes it down, right? And so when I'm sizing my tenon, I'm gonna push that point in that's closest to me, and I'm gonna look where I'm scribing a line, and when that line matches up to where the other point is, I know that I have, in this case, 55 millimeters, right? Or whatever size that you're looking for. So I don't have to worry about eyeing it, especially if I'm using a nice piece of wood that sometimes you just don't want to eyeball, right? So now I have a little reference line where I can just quickly go in and make it painting that's going to be perfectly fine. Right? Yes. And I'd like to put, like I said, a little scribe. So I'll just do that really quickly and have that, put that edge off. And that's good. Let's check this up and then we will make some real shavings, right? With our spindle roughing gouge. Well, as I'm talking about this, spindle roughing gouge is a really unfortunate name, right? Roughing gouge. Because you just think that, especially when you're starting out, right? Oh, it's just going to be used for roughing. But it's just a really awesome, versatile tool. Gives you really, really nice, clean surfaces. Most of the time you want to use it just in spindle orientation, but you can use it for more than just that. I won't get too much into that. But the nice thing about it is you have this really nice, sharp, curved surface, and you have this hefty tool that doesn't bounce around a whole lot. So if you can focus the cutting edge of this tool on the surface of your spinning wood, like a skew, just angle your bevel and just make these nice controlled cuts using your hip contact, you can get a really nice, controlled, smooth surface. We can start out, I hate to say you can start sanding at whatever grit, because a lot of times people say that it's just a little bit of BS. But you could start sanding at higher grits than you would if you just use it like a scraper. So we're going to do the same thing. Bevel contact, angle our bevel, and then we're going to make some really nice cuts. So I say all of that to kind of talk about why I like it quite a bit, but also just to if you're only using a spindle roughing gouge for roughing, but you have a project that needs a nice long continuous curve, it's an awesome tool, especially if you're not comfortable with a skew or something like a forged spindle gouge or something like that. I really like it, and it accomplishes really nice things. Okay, so here I'm going to use a little bit of tailstock support to start with, even though we might not necessarily need to. But I'm going to take some pretty heavy cuts, and these heavy cuts are maybe a little bit of force. So just having that tailstock support is just a little bit of a reassurance. Well, it's just a little bit out of round, and that's all right. Okay, 14 millimeters, that's the rough thickness of the bolt, which is going to be right here. So let's just true up the surface a little bit. And same sort of thing, I'm using my hip to drive this. So just doing that Woodturners dance. It was recorded. It's a little bit embarrassing, right, dancing without actually doing it. But I'm using my hips, right? And that gives me this nice smooth surface, and I'm pretty true. So now, I'm just going to make these heavy cuts and get a really rough cone shape to this. I'm pressing on the wood, but I'm also pressing down on my tool rest at the same time. These are just the wrenches. I'm not really focused on the surface qualities. at this point, all right, that's good enough for now. We'll leave some meat at the back end, so that way when I take the tailstock away, I have a lot of weight back here, keeping everything pretty stable. If I were to go in and make this nice curved cut right here, where I come to a pretty thin spindle, well, that'd be like a finial demo. I don't want to do that. So we want to keep a nice amount of heads toward our headstock. Right. Now, let's get a rough shape, that 14 millimeter size for our, we use the parting tool. Right? So I'm going to set this at 14 millimeters. Remember, 12 is the size of our entrance hole. So 14 is going to be just a little bit big for what we want, and we'll size it down. Yeah. This is another thing that when I started turning, it was terrifying looking. Like, I'm going to make this sizing cut by holding my parting tool and then my calipers here at the same time. So if you think about spinning wood, shooting caliper at your face, it could be pretty rough. But again, if I'm just holding this with a light touch, be aware of the spinning object and any sort of loose clothing or whatever, right? And I put my parting tool here, I ride the surface, and I have my calipers set at 14 millimeters. As soon as my calipers drop through, I know that this is at 14 millimeters. These are cheap calipers, so it might be like 13.8 or so. But now the very end of my pedestal is 14 millimeters. And even if I'm a little bit off with that, like I pushed a little bit too much, well, I still have 2 millimeters or so room to work with. Right? So let's make this, and let's say we have this little column right here, that's about 14 millimeters. Right? So eventually we're going to move a little bit from the tip because that center point's coming in. But this should be good enough. So let's move to our spindle gouge, our half-inch spindle gouge, and we'll shape the end right here. I'll take off my tailstock support so I can get rid of that center point. Right. With the spindle gouge, this is a half-inch spindle gouge. I grind it in the same sort of way. I have a swept back grind to it, and it's pretty aggressive. It's like we'll call it like a detail grind, because typically if I'm using this, it's for like these delicate cuts where I'm just making details. If I was doing this long sweeping curve, I'll use something like my spindle roughing gouge for that. Right. But here, I want to make sure that I am just following, making a little dome. And again, doing that Woodturners dance. So when you're using a spindle gouge, a little bit different than a bowl gouge. I'm making this nice domed cut. I'm not only curving the gouge, but I'm raising it up and moving it over with my heel. And I have this nice curved edge. With this is going to be the spot where my flower top is spinning on. So I want to make sure that it is pretty curved and I don't have any like flat spots or bumps. And if I do, having this wing ground, right, lets me do just a little bit of shear scraping. I can really refine that pretty well. Right? So now I have this. I'm pretty happy with the shape of that. So I want to start getting closer to my 12 millimeters. Right, so let's just take off the quarter here. And so we can start sizing this down. All right, so 12 millimeters. Let's see. A lot of times I'll, sometimes I'll measure this. I'll always measure that. Let me retract that statement. I always measure it because if I make this too small, then I'm kind of screwed. But a lot of times instead of going from the calipers back and forth, I'll just take my bowl and see if I'm getting close. So right now, I'm just putting my bowl, it's probably blocking the camera a little bit, but I'm putting my bowl up here, I'm just wiggling it around, right? And I know that I'm pressing on with a lot of force and nothing's happening. And I can look at it and I can see that my pedestal is a little bit wider than that entrance hole. So that tells me without
using my calipers and being so anal about 12 millimeters or 12.5 millimeters or so exactly, I can just eye it and get pretty close. And then just be a little bit more gingerly with taking off a little bit of material. So I'm pretty close. Let's just take off a little bit more. Just fine, delicate cuts. Right. It's probably pretty close. This is also something where if you're not real comfortable, like taking off just tiny little bits of material, get the sandpaper out. Just get it close and then sand it. So just crack the edge. It's all right. Demo piece. Not the hollow, just suppressed. That's right there. His character though. So I've got a little bit more. I could probably force it on, but let's just do one more cut. This will be the one that gets me, right? This is the real third time's the charm. We'll just do one more cut right here. And then after that, once we have our bulb shape, then it's just a matter of making some shavings and getting a nice curve. We'll talk about one more thing that's important. Let's see. So we're not really removing a whole lot of material, it's just wisps. Right. Wisps of shavings. And if you're real close, you can just shear scrape it a little bit, go back and forth, and I think that should be pretty good. Yeah. So what I'm going to do also is I'm going to just take off a little bit of material at the neck here, not too much, but this just gives me a little bit of room so I don't bottom my bowl out when I'm getting that final test fit. There we go. So now it's on. It's pretty secure. It's spinning around. It's kind of fun. I've always wanted to turn the lathe on when I'm doing this, but actually, you know what? I have done that for other things. This is kind of a nice parlor trick. I'll keep the speed down. I make these like egg sculptures where it's sort of the same concept, but it's a little egg within a big egg. And when you have the fit just right, face it down. It's kind of a little like illusion. Oops. Let's see. We'll start out low speed, and we won't go crazy fast. Right? So it's about 700. So it's spinning, right? And then I sized it pretty well, so I can just stop it and mess around with it. Spin it again, and there it goes. Kind of fun. The spinning things are fun, right? But that's how you know that you have a nice, like, it's not a great way to double check, but you can verify that you have a nice rounded top, and you're doing this, and it's just spinning perfectly well. Okay, so we need to finish the rest of the pedestal. All right, so let's pull this back off. Watch me. Just break it. There we go. We'll have to leave it on like turning a captured ring, right? Oh, here we go. So I've got my bulb, and it's fine, right? So now I want to just make this nice curve. I can't get the full length though. I could, but I still have my tenon in here inside the jaws. So if I just like maximize the length right here, I'm going to end up with like a tenon on the bottom. And that might be nice if you have a specific design. But what I typically will like to do is, so if I have a really nice expensive piece of wood or something, and I do want to maximize the length, I will turn as close to the chuck jaws as I'm comfortable doing. And then I've made some just like glue chucks with a hole in the middle. You can flip this around and put the bulb through, and it's kind of going through the spindle. Then use some hot glue to hold it in place if you really needed to true up and finish the bottom. But right here, what I'll typically like to do is I'll make this mark, and that's going to be the end of my pedestal, and that's going to be enough room to where I can get in with a parting tool and or my skew and get a pretty good surface on the bottom of my pedestal. So for the rest of this,
we're going to try to use our spindle roughing gouge, and then I'll use my spindle gouge for just a tiny little chamfer on the bottom for aesthetics. But it's good. You know, the high pressure part is over. It's always the fit. I'm like worrying the whole time demoing. Don't screw the fit up. Don't screw the fit up. No, it's just a matter of not destroying the pedestal. And so let's see if we can do that. So again, spindle roughing gouge. I'll turn the speed up. Not crazy fast. 1400 or so, which is pretty reasonable for something this small. And I will I'll put not a whole lot of pressure. I'm going to turn the speed up just a little bit more. Like maybe 1600 or so, and just work. So with this, I'm holding it on the side. I'm not using it like a scraper. Holding it on the side, keeping it down a little bit. And as I'm making this curve, I'm just using my hip to do so, and I'm rotating the tool like I would with a spindle gouge or anything like that. You can hear it chattering just a little bit, and if you get on the upslope just like that, you're gonna get a little mini catch. That's no big deal. Right? If that happened with a skew, you get the spirals, right? You know what I'm talking about. That's disheartening. But here, not too bad. So we have like this, and we will get it real close right there. And make sure you're not really cutting. Yeah, we'll clean that up a little bit. But for the sake of the demo, let's just keep going. All right, let's get our spindle gouge just to clean up that neck. And then we will we'll blend our curve from here to the top. Right. Typically what I would like to do is, you can do this before or after. Right. It makes it a little bit more fragile, but I like to put just a little bit of a fillet coming up. I just think it looks kind of nice. So you have like a chest piece or something, a little collared ends to that neck. Right. And you can just run your spindle gouge, blend that together. Good enough. What that does also when you narrow this neck is it lets the bowl sit at a little bit more of an angle. If you have this really thick neck, you're going to be restricted. But if the neck is narrower, there's less material to hit the side of the bowl. So you get a little bit better of an angle as well. And then we're just going to make a few more cuts. If you find that it's really chattering, you can stabilize it some. I'm pushing pretty hard though, just for the sake of noise. You can also roll your tool up a little bit to get a cleaner cut, but that gets into the territory if you roll it up too much, you might end up being a little bent. But it's not too bad. If you're rubbing your bezels, it's not too bad. You can pick up on the cuts pretty easily. And when we get right toward the edge, where this is getting thin, just go more slowly. Clear shavings out, especially when you have spindle roughing gouge, these big wings. And just make some light cuts. And blend everything in. And you can, if you end up with just little, like there's a tiny little thick point right there, but if you have something where you're not comfortable, just taking little shavings off, just get your sandpaper, which no big deal. So right here, let's just make one more cut, and I'm going to just blend this right here in with the red, and this is where I'll use my little spindle gouge to make a chamfer on the edge, and we'll part this off. And then we'll be done. Good. So spindle roughing gouge, but it's such a nice tool, and it's a really, really clean surface. So I've got my spindle gouge, like this is gonna be at the end of my pedestal, and so we'll make a little mark right here, a little like deep groove. And then I'm gonna take my spindle gouge, And I'm just going to roll it over, and you can do whatever you want here. Typically, I like to make like a nice kind of opposing curve. I think that just looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper than I need to. I'm going to go back to my, there it is, my skew, and just remove the material. And we'll use our parting tool if this is a little bit too aggressive. All right. So make one little cut at the bottom. Yeah, let's use our parting tool. With my parting tool, I don't know if you'll be able to see this right here. Let's see. I like to grind it so that I have a little bit of a point on one end. So if it shows up on the camera, right there, it's not perfectly flat across. It's kind of like a skew. So with that long point that's toward my pinky right here, that's going to be really, really sharp. And if I present that to the wood, kind of like the skew, it's slicing that edge instead of just being a total scraper like a normal parting tool might, right? And if I want to keep my surface really clean, right, whatever surface I want to keep clean, I'll make sure to point that pointed edge toward it. A little bit of chatter there. There we go. All right. So now, with parting tool, gosh, it was I think when I started turning, it made this like a classic turner mistake. I had this little parting tool, I think it was this one specifically, and I was turning like some green log that I picked up off the side of my house. It's just some tractor piece, and I needed to part it off. So I'd seen plenty of YouTube videos, right? Professional YouTube watcher. And so I stuck my parting tool in. It was like maybe a 4-inch diameter piece. And I just stuck my parting tool in as far as I could go, and it caught, and it flipped it up and like banged my thumb. But it was terrifying. If I'm saying that, I know I'm getting a lot of chatter because I'm pressing kind of hard. But especially if you're new, when you're using a parting tool that's not a diamond parting tool, if you can just widen the kerf, you won't have that same terrifying mistake that I had. Right? So we are getting close to the end right here. Yeah, the surface has it's probably okay. It's not that great. Right. When you get toward the end, you can just force it. So it's not that bad. A lot of times, if I have a little bit more room, I'll do my last cut with that spindle detail guide, a very smaller one. That way, we can really slice off those fibers. And so now I'm left with just a little bit of a nub, and you can use whatever tool you have on hand, a little knife or just a little skew to take care of that nub. When you're doing this, make sure your fingers are, ask me how I know, right? Make sure your fingers are below the other side of your cut, right? So you don't end up slicing yourself. Before I started turning, I did a decent amount of like spoon carving and did a lot of whittling growing up. But I was like, I want to be a spoon carver. I don't know how many times I cut myself, far more than turning, but I finally gave that up and bought a lathe. And it's more fun this way anyway. So now I've got my pedestal right here. It should sit pretty flat. Well, let's do it right there. And we have our bowl. That's our little flower. Force it on, and it sits, and now it spins. And hopefully, when it stops spinning, it'll, it's not too bad. Sometimes it just stops immediately. It kind of points toward the sky, and it's not as much of an angle as I want, but it's not too bad. Let's see, how much time do we have left? It might be toward the end. So let me just say a few more things. Okay, I won't talk for much longer because the turning part is done. I'll pass this around so you can check that out. But with these
gosh, with turning in general, I'm going to get a little political here. Not in that way. Turning in general, it's wood versus embellished. So what do you want to show? Do you want to show like really beautiful wood? That walnut's really pretty. That maple's really pretty as well. So I could finish that up, sand it, put a nice finish on it, and it'll look awesome. But I might want to do something different. I typically like split my time 50-50 with doing like heavily embellished, carved, or turned or burned pieces, and then other pieces that just display wood. Because again, if I didn't like the look of wood, I would work with something else, like ceramics or whatever. But wood is so cool in so many different ways. It's really beautiful on its own, but it's also fun to make things into, like I want to make a little flower. Let's see. All right, I'll talk for about 5 minutes on this, and this is something where I could talk forever, but I won't keep you. So there's a lot of different things to do. One thing that I discovered pretty recently is if you're trying to color something and you want to, the problem with paint, for example, except for milk paints, it might show the grain, but if you use a lot of bright colors, it hides the grain, and you can't really tell it's wood. Like you're just looking at a piece of 3D printed plastic that's colored, like might as well be. But if you want to use a color, this is what I've discovered recently. These watercolor brush pens are really nice, and they're really vibrant ways to add some cool splashes of color. I think cool splashes of color, but also show that you're working with wood. And for these flowers, especially where like if you're making a flower, flowers are supposed to be pretty and colorful. If you want to like make a wooden one, like show the wood. But if you want to make a flower, like make them really bright and vibrant. You can use these. This is just something I was using on project, but with these colors, they don't hide the wood grain. If you have something like this is a piece of curly maple, I'll pass this around and you can move it around. I just put a couple of coats of this watercolor pigment on those and then finish it with some shellac. So it has this really nice shimmery stained glass appearance. There's a lot of chatoyance coming through from the curls. But if you're combining that with colors, it's just really cool. I'm making this box right now that's just a piece of maple for this collaboration project. But I'm coloring it with these cool little markers because you can still tell it's wood and it's just really vibrant. Other things that I do a lot are like acrylic paints, dry brushing. So if you know like Rick Cannon, Memphis area turner does a lot of coloring with acrylic paints, a lot of dry brushing. It's a really beautiful way to color something with a complicated surface. But like that bowl that's being passed around that's pretty flat might not be the best avenue because you're just going to get these buildups of clumps of paint. So those markers could be nice. With carving, I like to use like rotary tools or Dremels. You guys know Ken Rizza, right? A lot of you do. I started working with him recently, and he's about to release this line. This is a little shout out for him. He's a cool guy, really nice guy too, and really generous as well. If you don't know him, he started Woodturners Wonders, which was like it's still around, but it's not. He sold it a couple years ago, I think. But it's really affordable tools for woodturners, and he probably cut his margins quite a bit to provide these things that are really affordable. But he's starting to come out with this line of rotary carvers that are really nice. And a rotary carver is just a bit that's spinning around like a lathe. And if you're doing a lot of carving, that's the way to go if you don't want to use hand tools. But if you see him and you're interested in carving, talk to him about it. He might be able to hook you up with a good deal on this line of stuff that's coming out soon. But with these flower pieces, gosh, I'm just starting to ramble right now, so I'll wrap it up. Sky's the limit. Like anything else, turning, wood is great. You can take it further if you not, or if you want to, or you can just highlight the wood itself. And whatever you make, spend time on it. It's going to be beautiful, and hopefully you have fun making it. So, any questions or anything?
Where did you get the paint pens?
I got the paint pens from Michael's art supply store. And I like it because it's it's my store. Michael Anderson is my name, so I get a kickback whenever I shop there. No, there's one down the road for me. It's either Michael's or Hobby Lobby. I think Michael's is better than Hobby Lobby. And I just randomly saw them on sale one day and bought them. Like, oh, that'd be cool to try out. Didn't use them for like 6 months or so, and then decided to try them, and yeah, they're really cool. I have a pack. I have a couple, but I think the pack I got there was like 30 or 40 pens for $20, something like that. And they're super nice, really easy if you're trying to do fine detailing, especially if you have a burned border like that piece that's going around. It's a great way to color with precision.
The one you sent around, it's got the flat flower.
Mhm.
But how long did it take to do that?
Oh yeah, those just the burning.
Yeah.
That probably took 3 hours or so. Maybe 2 hours or so.
What did
Yeah.
you burn that with, Michael?
I burned that with just a wood. I have a master detailer or detail master. This I won't pass it around. It's kind of a big unit, but I've got this. It's a detail master Excalibur, but it's a little bit older. And it's awesome. I got it used from a guy on the AAW forum. If you're not a member of the AAW forum, it's a great place to like commune with other woodturners, and then occasionally you find good used deals. So it's a pretty high quality machine with 2 spots for pins, and they take Detail Master pin. But Razor Tip is a big wood burning company, and they sell adapters. So for that, for that flower, I just use a. I'll pass this around because it's kind of cool to see how small the ball is. This is a wood burning tip that has a tiny, tiny little ball on the end. So toward the center of the flower where the dots are really small, that tiny little tip that looks like it's something broken off is, what's the size? It's something like 0.5 millimeter diameter ball. So with that flower, I'll start with bigger ones that are maybe 2 millimeters in diameter and do the outer quarter of it, and then move to the next size up. So as I'm moving toward the center, I would go with the smaller tips. And it's just dot by dot. It takes a while. I did it when it was cold out though, so it was kind of nice. It kept my fingers warm. But it's pretty mindless though. You have something you need to work out in your mind, just get a wood burning tip and make thousands of dots. And that's great. But yeah, wood burning is a whole different rabbit hole. Power carving, hand carving, a whole different rabbit hole to go down. And just like anything else, there's skills that you can develop and apply to whatever your project is. Any other questions? I started to get the sniffles toward the end, so apologies if that was kind of annoying. Yes, sir.
You said you got your markers at Michael, what kind were they? Did they with the alcohol kind?
They, I don't know if they have alcohol as a carrier. I think they're just pure water and then maybe some other solvent, but they're watercolor brush pens. Yeah. Yeah, they're not the. I don't think there's an alcohol carrier at all.
Okay. You ever used an alcohol marker?
Just a little bit. I had a red alcohol marker that I got from someone at some points. That was a long time ago before I started turning. Those are nice though. You get pretty vibrant colors with just one pass in a lot of cases. But it's been a long time.
Have you ever used, I do leather work as well, and we have different dye colors. Have you ever used any of those?
I've used Feebling's the USMC black dye for like if I were to finish this piece. Like I can leave this maple as it is, or can dye it. There's a lot of options for ebonizing it, but yeah, usually my go-to is black leather dye, and 2 coats, and it's just as black as you'll get. But I'd like to get the there's like a rust colored one. I forget the actual color. It's like a rusty brown red color. That'd be kind of fun to play in. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Leatherworking is a different rabbit hole too. That's pretty cool. You ever combine leatherworking with your turnings? Yeah. You might have had a box here last time with. Oh no. Okay. Never mind. Well, hey, thank you all for being here. Wow, thank you for having me.